Welcome back again to the third module of the application of GIS in conservation. Again, my name is Josephat Kashoki. I'm an ecologist. So it's a continuation of the previous session on mapping and monitoring of habitat loss. So in the previous session, we talked about biodiversity hotspots. We talked about conservation. My colleague also talked about tracking of illegal species. So now we move to another part of the same, but it's connected when we're talking about prioritization. So assuming we're talking about an area that we want to go about maybe doing conservation. So what drives us to do this? So we need to understand that conservation or biodiversity conservation it's not as simple as people might term it to be. So it's a complex undertaking. And when we're talking about prioritization, it helps us identify where, how, or what we need or we should do first to conserve biodiversity effectively. So our assumption is we cannot do everything anywhere at once. So to be able to maximize on maybe the resources that we have, the skills that we have, we need to prioritize an area. So referring to maybe to the previous session on tracking illegal activities. So unless maybe a certain animal is threatened due to illegal activities, you might want to prioritize that rather than the one that's in huge numbers. So that's what we mean when we're talking about conservation prioritization. But again, on the same, we could prioritize an area. So it could be an animal that we are prioritizing for conservation, or it could be an area that we want to prioritize. So when we're talking about conservation prioritization is we're doing this because we have some animals or we have some areas that face more threats than others. So you need to plan which area needs more attention than the other. But this does not mean that the area that is not under threat should be neglected. It's only that this one gives you allows you to prioritize which area needs immediate attention, but also thinking of how is this one connected by others. So in this flowchart, we're giving a simplified aspect that we can use to prioritize a region. So starting from the target landscape, the candidate landscape species, you identifying the human activities in that area, selecting that landscape species, and defining maybe what's connecting between these two. So if you choose an area and you say this is where you want to put maybe a conservation, what's the implication of the human use of that area? So once we are able to follow these different steps, this can be customized depending on the area of application. So you have to follow different steps so that you are able to achieve maybe a priority area that you want to undertake maybe an aspect of conservation. It could be a species conservation, it could be an ecosystem conservation. So these areas, the vulnerability or the criteria of maybe selecting that the biodiversity hotspots, we're talking about how vulnerable is this area. Yeah, so the vulnerability measure of to which degree the species or are at risk of extinction. So if you compare maybe two species, one with a species that's in plentiful of number, but another area whereby the species are very low in number. So you could try to check between the two, which one has more pressure of being extinct, maybe in the next few years to come. So your prioritization of the conservation or the hotspots, biodiversity hotspots, is informed by vulnerability of that area. Irreplaceability, again, the uniqueness of that area or the uniqueness of that species. So if it's removed, we don't have a replacement of the same. Yeah, and then another one is on economic cost. So how much would it cost you to maybe carry out the conservation? So whatever showing in this gives you like a sample of an area and the different uses of that area. So between the natural uses or the species habitat use and the human use of the same area. So how do we come into an agreement on how to use this space. Again, you can see it's when we when we use the GIS aspect, you see different parcels of the same land being used for different aspects. So if we plan well, we could allocate each and every space maybe a utilization or a use that doesn't compromise the other one. So we try to have a harmonized use of that area, whereby the habitats for the species are able to use, and then the human activities are also able to be used in the same place. So how we apply this, we most of the time when we're talking about maybe trying to check where we have high rate of maybe species vulnerability. So the use of the IUCN red list. So which area is being categorized as under threat. So if we overlay the species vulnerability data over maybe a map, then we are able to categorize which areas are more vulnerable to maybe threats, and which area should now be prioritized when we're talking about setting up or putting resources so that a species does not go extinct due to a use of a certain space. So these layers, I think the previous colleague talked about how we track this. So you can overlay these layers. It could be the cost layers, the acquisition of the land, the restoration cost, and then they will guide us on how much can we invest on this vis-a-vis this other area. Yeah. So the use of these criteria mostly we are commonly found when we're talking about the key biodiversity area. So the sites are selected based on the criteria that's like the threatened biodiversity, ecological integrity, and irreplaceability. Yeah. You can also have another use whereby we're talking about the systematic conservation planning, using spatial prioritization tools to optimize site selection based on biodiversity value and cost efficiency. The Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund looks at the map that you, or the proposal that you submitting. Does it meet the requirement of a certain area that has been identified as threatened? So in this aspect, so once you've identified an area and you've set this as a conservation area, you also need to track maybe the effectiveness of that conservation. Yeah. So we've prioritized an area and we've come to agreement. This area need to be under conservation. So once it's put under conservation, then we also need to track and see if the conservation aspect is effective or not. So the effectiveness of that conservation area, we check it at the degree to which the conservation is meeting or is achieving its objective. It could be an objective of protecting biodiversity hotspots. So when we set to conserve this area, we had some indicators that we said we want to check and see if they are met. So the importance of maybe measuring the conservation effectiveness is to ensure that the accountability bit of it, and also to inform the adaptive management. So if we thought that the animal is only able to move from point A to point B, but then over time when we are monitoring this, we realize that it also uses point C, then we can come back to the drawing board and see the whole use area of a certain species. And that's one allows us now to have an adaptive management or adaptive plan to include point C of the same area, so that the animal has enough space to roam around and also maybe allow for breeding and also the feeding. So this again, when we're talking about measuring the effectiveness, it allows us to see which are the gaps that we couldn't know when we were doing the initial planning. So the effectiveness bit of it is used or helps us to understand or identify these gaps, and from this we are able to tell how we going to proceed from there. So key indicators of maybe conservation effectiveness, it can be classified into ecological indicators, maybe the species size, so the number of the species. So initially, if the area that we set up for conservation only had a limit, maybe assuming 20 number of a certain species. So after conservation or after putting that area into a conservation, as the number increased, yeah, the ecological indicator, the social and economic indicator, again in that area. So once we put this conservation into play, does that one also translate to the improved livelihood of the community surrounding in that area? Yeah? So we look at this and see if it's the conservation part, is it affecting the community in that area negatively or positively? The policy indicators, yeah? So how is this conservation integrated to the whole country maybe plan on how it's supposed to